Women's Leadership Success, and today I'm very excited to talk to Stephanie Cawthon. And she's written a great book, Disability is Human, and actually I like the workbook that goes with this just as much as the book. It's really great, and I'm so happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here as well.
Please tell us your background and why it was important to you to write this book.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So I've been working in this field many, many years, at 30 at least. So I felt like it was time to kind of culminate all of my experience in research, leadership, and running a handful of research centers over the year, plus just translating information. And so I thought it was good to write a book that really attended to and addressed the issues of accessibility and why it needs to happen within our homes, our places of work, out in our community, and how we can do that well. I feel like so many people feel awkward or they just don't have any idea how to do it or sort of apprehensive. And it's a big thing in this life. And I think with more experience, we can each figure out small things that we can do that are still critical that will build upon each other in terms of accessibility. So I'll share a story from years and years of working with people. I wanted to do that. And I wanted to put access and accessibility in a place that felt personal and professional at the same time. And so that is how the book came to be.
Beautiful. Before we discuss all disabilities, could you tell us more about what deaf people struggle with?
Sure. So, what I will say is that it's a large population. There are deaf people, there are people that identify as hard of hearing, deaf blind. There's a whole host of people who fall into that category. And so when I use deaf with an uppercase D, it's a sort of an umbrella category for all of those people experiencing hearing loss of any kind. So barriers to communication and access to communication, I think, is the primary struggle. When you think about language and the kinds of barriers that occur when people are considering visual access to information. So for today, this is awesome because we have all kinds of ways to access this information. There's captioning, we have sign language, we have spoken English. People can watch this and possibly read lips. And so for me, that's critical. And that is one way to access. There's not just one way to access information for deaf people. That's very helpful. And then learning more about options and what's possible. Those are positive things. And also often we categorize it, we call it deaf gain. What do we get from being deaf versus having it have such a negative connotation? There are opportunities and there are different ways to address and access communication. It's not a one size fits all.
If I were to meet you without any interpreters, what is the first thing I need to ask you so that I can connect with you better?
I think, first of all, ask me if communication is clear, if I have access to whatever is happening in that space. So for me specifically, it depends on the environment and the situation. I have and use hearing aids. If it's a large space and they're using a microphone for a presentation, that would make a difference. Let's say, for example, I had a Zoom call, so it's via video, obviously, and it was this morning. It was an access check for everyone, not just me as a deaf person, everyone in the room. They were asking if access was clear. Does everybody have what they need? And so it's not always about me or just that one person who needs access. It's that everyone in the space and in that interaction needs access. And on the call, there were babies screaming and people had kiddos there. And so that the woman who had her babies in the room needed different access support as well. It wasn't just me. So really thinking about access globally, not just say the deaf person you're meeting or the person with a disability you're meeting, but more globally and how it can impact and affect everyone's access to communication.
That is a brand new thought for me. And I want to know more about access. But first, I would like to ask you, what is a disability?
Okay. So in academic language, it's, a definition of disability. Oh gosh, years of history and research go into that answer. Briefly, I feel like today the current theories, it's both physical, it's and then there's individual characteristics, it's a human experience, and then also how our world responds to a person, how society responds to a person with disability. So when we focus on access and that being about what's available, what people can do within different environments, but disability itself, there's the medical component, there's psychological components, there's individual characteristics for different disabilities. And I think often a big misunderstanding that people have is that disability, it can be so broad. I'll give you an example. If I break my leg, I have a disability, but that one's temporary. That's only 6 months till I'm out of that cast. Might be a mental health issue, maybe a season of depression, or something has impacted me and that's impacting my daily life and my functioning in a mental space. But that can also be a temporary disability. So individual characteristics of what the person is facing is big, but then also just, gosh, there's such a massive social aspect in terms of how people experiencing a disability or living with a disability, how they interact with the environment and the context with which they find themselves.
What percentage of people have a disability?
Okay. So the recent data shows from the CDC, I think they said about 1 in 4. So 25% of the population. At any time, a quarter of our population has a disability. Now, when I was conducting my research with current university students, it's higher because mental health issues crop up specifically post COVID. Then it's more like half the people at any given moment experience or live with a disability. And so it depends on who you ask and when, of course. But my guiding principle, like my data points that I use, is about 1 in 4, a quarter of the population.
So I'm going off the script that I sent you because my attention has gone to access. And since half the people could have a problem really having the kind of access they need for me to communicate with them well, it almost feels overwhelming. How do I begin to be more aware and help more people have access?
Well, one step at a time. Honestly, it's almost impossible to do it all at once and be once and done. So I think thinking about how we design our environments with access in mind and thinking ahead. One example is you sent me the agenda or the script before. That's key. That's a great step to give me the information in advance so I can prepare and be ready. That is a huge piece in terms of accessibility. And that's one little step. Like I mentioned before, there are different tools and technology that can help. I very recently used AI chat GBT for the first time. Just as a little vulnerable moment for me, I just to disclose, I used it yesterday. And so that these little things in technology can help reduction with feeling overwhelmed with all the information.
Mm.
My students often tell me that they use it and that helps. And again, it's so if you're going to use it well, not for plagiarism, of course. But these new technologies that are in place, if we think about them as a tool and how to use it well, and not forcing people to make the request all the time for access. Often, it's something I said in the book actually, is, RSVPing for events, for example. If it says, as I read through something and it says, let me know if you need anything or if you need access or an accommodation, well, that doesn't help me. Then I still have to do all the work. If you just set it up as a standard expectation for access, I will send you the agenda in advance. We will have captioning available. We will have 2 ways to access these information via video and audio. There'll be a transcript readily available. These types of things, setting those expectations in advance and letting folks know that it has already been thought about, not at the bottom like, hey, let me know if you need it. More, hey, we've done this, we've been proactive. And I notice often on social media, it's another good example, is the captions on video. This is good. That's one thing. And then secondly, alt text and image description. I'm seeing that sometimes, but it's often missing. And so, often people just post pretty pictures, but then they're not accessible, not widely accessible. And so if you take the time to add alt text and an image description before you post, that makes it so much more accessible, which kind of goes hand in hand with a PowerPoint presentation. Use alt text, send it in advance. That is just an additional consideration for people. And I think it's a big one. I think it's a new thought. I think it's a new step for people, but making that just part of the checklist when presenting or posting something, I think is great. And then something else, just thinking about use of words and terminology, often ableism or ableist lenses are used in terms of some of the words that we use. Like, let me give you a phrase. People say it and don't think twice. Falling on deaf ears. There's got to be another way to say that, right? Let's pause. What do you mean? What did you mean? Did you want feedback? Did you not get the feedback you wanted? Did you feel ignored? So if you replace the phrase with what you actually meant versus the impact of it, is it sounds like a criticism of deaf people. So if you just pause and say what you really meant, not the phrase that people toss around, just take that moment to be self-reflective and think about the language we use. I think that creates a different type of environment. I know often people find it funny or it's a joke, and yet I find it to be an opportunity to have a more engaging experience when we pay more attention to the language we use.
That's very helpful. I have to back up and ask what alt text is. I don't know.
Okay, sure. So with a screen reader, a person who has low vision will access visual information with a screen reader. And so alt text, alternative text, explains the image that's up there. And it's brief, maybe 3 sentences sometimes, but what your slide looks like will be read to a person with a visual disability. And so it's words. If there's words within an image, it just gives more context of visual information that would come through in an auditory way. So it's a way to access visual information. And often you'll see that maybe under the heading accessibility features. It's a technology thing. And so that's where you would gain access to that feature to add it to a PowerPoint or a posting online or in social media.
So in LinkedIn, there's a place that shows things you can add for more accessibility.
Yes. And I do 2 things. So when I post with an image, you can edit it to say add alt text. That's an option. You can say that. If you want to tag people, or there are a handful of options there. And one of them that you can choose is alt text. So you can add a paragraph or a couple of sentences to describe that image that you've chosen to post. And often you'll see as well that it's like, if you look at my posts at the bottom, if you scroll a little bit, it'll say image description, and then you can see it. You can see each post has image description there available in addition to the alt text.
I'm going to add that to my posts. I had no idea. I really appreciate that information. Could you
Awesome.
tell me what ableism is and why it's important?
Sure. So, my working definition of ableism is attitudes or perspectives about a disabled person being less than. So just that view, and on a very basic level, that a person with a disability is less than. It's in attitudes, bias. For example, if you're hiring folks and you notice that someone has a disability and you think that that person just can't do the job, but it's an assumption just by knowing that one little nugget. So that's an example of ableism. Just
Mm.
because they have a disability, they can't do this job.
Um, that's that's something we need to change.
Yeah, that's a hard one because it's a big one and it's pervasive. And, most of the time, people with a disability, when asked, what do you need? It's not even a primary accommodation. It's more people will respond with attitude, a shift in attitude. That is what impacts them every day. It's not accommodations always, it's just over time. It's really hard because those little things add up. You experience it every day. It's a lot.
Years ago, my 97-year-old godmother became blind, and I was in a store with her, and she asked the sales clerk a question, and the sales clerk answered me. And I said,
Mhm,
she's blind, but her brain works and she can hear what you're saying. Um, so I'm
mhm.
thinking maybe each one of us, since all the women that listen to this show and men are in powerful positions, if we see ableism happening, it's our job to speak up and remind people that they have a misperception about this person's ability.
Yes, for sure. And I also think that leaders can model things and attitudes and the language that they use without calling attention to everybody. Stop, let's have a meeting, we need to discuss this. Just do it. Lead by example, change the behavior, change the language. And I'm the same way. um, there's language use that I also need to consider, and be more thoughtful of my word choices. And so we just do that by example. And another thing is transparency. If you're building a culture where disability is not a negative thing, like, what? Like, let's be flexible. Let's add some flexibility. Instead of just automatically thinking, that person is lazy, like, let's take that out of the equation. It's how we model. It's not it's more by what ableism looks like in your behavior, like how you convey that. And so modeling that or leading by example is a really great way to kind of shift the attitudes surrounding that. My favorite quote right now is, accessibility is not a to-do list, it's a to be list. Who are you? Who do you want to be? How do you interact with your people? How do you interact out in the community with others? How do you demonstrate that disabilities are okay, that they're valued, and that it's just a part of the human experience? And so, yeah, it's something to do. It's something to be, not to do.
I had a good friend who was quadriplegic, a brilliant counselor, And I remember walking into a party with him, and somebody didn't know what to do, and he raised his hand and said, "Just reach for my hand and shake it." And so one of the things I'm getting from what you're saying is we all need to pay attention to this. And if you have a disability, it's important to speak up and help people know how to treat you or what they can expect in their interaction with you. I'm not sure I'm saying this right.
I think it goes both ways. So disabled people learning about their preferences and you learning about their preferences, and then setting up clear boundaries and being clearly communicating as the disabled person what they need, what they want, and self-advocating. So yes, and then everyone else being aware that it's a shared responsibility to provide access. It's not on the person with the disability. I have to ask for the accommodation. I have to follow up about the appointment. No, we need to figure out as a whole, what can each of us do to reduce the burden on that population that already experiences the burden, right? And so I think it's both. I think the people with disabilities knowing what they need and articulating that well, but then also everyone else realizing that part of that is on them, and how can everyone support the goal of accessibility.
So in a way, you've already answered the next question, but do you have anything else you want to add to how can we create more of an accessibility mindset? And I just want to say that this conversation has totally changed my perception today. And I would have thought of myself as already knowing what to do. And I can see I have so much to learn here.
Well, that's awesome. I love that. Thank you. That's why we have these conversations, right? That's the whole point of this. So thank you. I guess my recommendation is for people to think of access in three ways. First is making sure that people have connection, that there's connection to three things: to themselves. Like for me, can I show up in a room and feel like I can fully participate? Can I just show up and be me? Like here with you, I can communicate with you. That means this is great. I'm not pushed in a corner. I'm not an afterthought. We're communicating directly. This is it. We are both fully participating in this conversation. So another one is, what information do they need to be connected to in order to fully participate? Are we teaching someone with a disability? Do they have access to the information or not? The same access as their peers. The third thing that I would say is really connection to each other. So self, information, and each other. Does the person, maybe they want to disclose their disability, maybe not. And that is up to their discretion. Maybe they don't. Often, if you feel that vibe that someone's going to look down on you or patronize you, you're not going to disclose, and thus you lack that connection with the people in that space because you don't feel like you can disclose. So those three, being connected to those three different pieces of life, I think is really important.
And my last question is, what actions can we take personally and in companies to create better communication and conditions for people with disabilities?
So when I asked people in their workplaces, people with disabilities, what do you need today, right now? When I was doing some research, there were a couple of things that came up as themes. And the first is leadership. Clearly having leadership define the fact and be clear about the fact that disability is not a bad word and they will not be ignored. So it's how leadership in that company, in that space, represents themselves and their company. And value the community. Help building community and a culture within your organization. It's more than a conversation. But sometimes it's awkward, right? In that first conversation, fine, lean into that. It's part of my responsibility, let's say, as a leader. During our meeting time, we're going to lean in. We have employees, we're having resource groups. Provide a structured time where people can learn. but you don't know what you don't know. So provide that space and not have it judgment based, but just like, we're here to learn, and clearly designate a time. It's an investment in the culture of your space, of your community. And just really keep learning. It's a journey, right? Because it's about each of us individually. We're not going to fix the world overnight, right? And that's okay, because if everybody is working and learning individually, that will change the world. And so I think that is a real reason why I wrote the workbook that goes with the book, because it's like a roadmap. It's actionable items. You can do it on an individual level, on a group level. So you mentioned the workbook. That's why I wrote it. So these things are just right there, again, like a roadmap, and little steps that everyone can take.
Beautiful. Is there any last thing you would like to say to the people listening?
Yes. Welcome to the journey of disabilities. I think the title "Disability is Human" just applies to everyone. And I think it's really important to view it in that way and think about where we can make those changes. And they're so important. We haven't arrived yet. So, how do we get there? It's a journey, one step at a time. So, welcome, and reach out to me. If I can help in any way, I'm more than happy to. This is my passion. This is what I do. I am happy to help. So, please reach out to me.
How would people contact you if they would like to reach out to you?
All right. Well, if you're on LinkedIn, you can find me there. I'm there every day posting. So you can connect with me there, or my website has a form for, say, if you want some more in-depth information or a conversation, we could set up a time to chat. Please fill that out. Do that. We have a newsletter that goes out monthly that is rich with all kinds of information, strategies, successes, all kinds of good information. So my website and LinkedIn are two great places to get in touch with me.
Great. And we'll put that up on the post on our website too, so that people have that information. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been enlightening. I'm excited to change and put alt on my LinkedIn and to do a lot of things to change the way I've been treating my fellow disabled people. I'm one of them.
Well, yeah, we all are at one time or another, right? Thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome.